I found myself in a peculiar situation that would ultimately change my life forever. There was something unsettling about the way my fiancé and his mother communicated through their silent gestures. My instincts told me to learn their secret language, though I never imagined what dark truths I would uncover. 1 month before what should have been the happiest day of my life, my dear friend Sarah noticed my unusual behavior. With concern in her voice, she commented that I seemed to be preparing for a difficult exam rather than my own wedding. When she suggested hiring a wedding planner to ease my burden, I forced a smile and shook my head. I remember telling her that I wanted to handle the preparations myself, as it was meant to be the most meaningful day of my life. But deep inside, I felt no joy or excitement about the celebration. The thought of hiring professionals to handle everything was tempting. After all, money could solve many problems. Yet here I was, a successful businesswoman with considerable wealth, facing a dilemma that no amount of money could resolve. The loneliness of wealth was a paradox I knew all too well. I had learned early on that showing vulnerability could be dangerous, as people might try to exploit any weakness for their own gain. This fear was deeply ingrained in me by my late father, who had suffered greatly from his naive trust in others. Sometimes I wonder how different things might have been if my parents were still alive. I barely remember my mother. She passed away when I was just 3 years old. My father never remarried, partly to spare me from having a stepmother, but also because his wealth made him wary of women's intentions. His bitter experiences had taught him to question whether women were truly interested in him or just his fortune. Though he had several relationships throughout his life, each ended in disappointment before he could consider marriage again. Eventually, he declared that his only true love would be me, his daughter, Holly Beth. He dedicated his life to caring for me with unconditional love, and I, in turn, strived never to disappoint him. I excelled in my studies and graduated with honors, but when he expressed his wish for me to continue my education abroad, I resisted. The thought of leaving him alone terrified me. I remember pleading with him, asking how either of us would manage without the other, insisting there were perfectly good universities right here. But my father was determined, believing that studying abroad would provide not only a better education but also greater security. He insisted that Europe would offer not only superior education but also greater security, attempting to ease his worries about my safety. I couldn't bring myself to disagree with him, having always regarded his words as absolute truth. It wasn't until after completing my studies abroad that I began to question his decisions. When I returned home, I discovered a truth that shattered my heart. My father was ill. Though he wasn't hospitalized and maintained his cheerful, active demeanor, the changes in his health were unmistakable. He never directly told me about his condition, but the frequent doctor visits and trips to various clinics raised red flags in my mind. I pieced together fragments of conversations about chemotherapy, radiation treatments, and gamma knife surgery, leading me to the devastating conclusion that he had cancer. As time passed, he finally decided to stop hiding the truth from me. In his characteristically firm way, he told me that while his illness was serious, I must keep hope alive. He believed that nothing was beyond repair and assured me the best doctors were handling his treatment. Though he'd heard about treatment options in places like Israel, he refused to leave his company and our home. He explained that I was just beginning to understand the business, and despite my intelligence, it was too soon to entrust everything to me. Above all, he needed to ensure I would lead a happy and secure life. Tragically, either the treatments failed or the disease was more determined than we were. It progressed rapidly. As my father's condition deteriorated, our conversations grew longer and more profound. One day, with tears in his eyes, he apologized for leaving me alone. He expressed regret that I hadn't already started my own family, saying he would have thoroughly vetted any potential husband. His greatest worry was not being able to see me find the right person. I tried to comfort him, fighting back my own tears as I insisted he would live longer. With heartbreaking honesty, he replied that if he were a dog in this condition, he would have already been released from his suffering. 2 years ago, my father passed away, leaving me completely alone in this world. Now, on the eve of my wedding, I desperately needed his advice more than ever. I was about to marry someone who seemed kind, loving, and disinterested in my wealth, yet doubts lingered in my mind. I met Peter by chance in a small cafe near my office, my sanctuary where I could enjoy peaceful moments alone with my coffee. My colleagues knew to respect my solitude, but that day, my quiet was interrupted by an attractive young man. At first, his presence irritated me, though I didn't politely dismiss him. After all, he was simply looking for a place to enjoy his coffee in the crowded establishment. His interested glances in my direction weren't surprising. I was, after all, an attractive woman. There was nothing suspicious about his approach. It was just a casual conversation that started because there were no other available seats. As we sat facing each other, the silence between us felt awkward yet somehow meaningful. We seemed to share not just our age and social class, but perhaps values and interests too. I noticed he was carrying the latest novel by a famous author, and when he mentioned it, I found myself admitting I hadn't particularly enjoyed it. That simple comment sparked a lively discussion about various literary works, and before I knew it, nearly an hour had passed. When I realized the time, I apologized and explained that I needed to return to work, as business always came first. He responded by noting how what was meant to be a simple coffee break had turned into such an engaging conversation. I nodded, acknowledging that our chance meeting had indeed been pleasant. When he suggested meeting again after work, we suddenly realized we hadn't even properly introduced ourselves. "I'm Holly Beth," I told him, and he replied with "I'm Peter." The uniqueness of my name led to a brief personal story, and I found myself explaining how my father had simply liked Holly, while my mother had wanted something more special. I carefully avoided mentioning that my parents were no longer alive, feeling it wasn't the right time for such revelations. Yet it was clear there would be plenty more opportunities for deeper, more stimulating conversations. We agreed to meet again that evening in a more suitable location. As I grew increasingly attracted to Peter, I remained cautious, revealing little about myself. My concerns about him being interested in my wealth proved unfounded. He wasn't seeking to marry an heiress and had his own resources. He managed a branch of his family's business in the city and lived with his mother, which was unusual for someone his age. He explained that his mother had a chronic illness that, while not debilitating, required constant companionship and care. Our relationship progressed rapidly after that. Though I was surprised that he never invited me to his home, Peter had a simple explanation. He'd been living abroad and had sold his previous apartment, not yet interested in purchasing a new one. They had found their dream house, but it needed repairs, so he and his mother were staying in a hotel. "The rooms are lovely," he told me, "but of course, it wouldn't be appropriate to invite you there." I accepted his explanation without question. Peter's attitude toward me was serious, and when he proposed, I wasn't surprised. It was as if I had been expecting it for a long time. I accepted but requested to postpone the wedding. Though he found this request strange, I explained that I needed time to prepare and had many short-term business commitments. By then, Peter knew that I had lost both my parents and lived alone in a large house. Once the proposal was made and the wedding date set, it seemed nothing would stand in the way of our life together, except for his mother's dependence on him. This became an undeniable turning point in our commitment to a shared future. Peter sadly explained his mother's condition to me, telling me she was deaf and mute. He stressed that it wasn't a genetic defect, but rather the result of a serious illness in her childhood. He described how she had overcome it but still faced challenges, especially when alone. She couldn't make phone calls or understand when people spoke to her directly. Remembering scenes from movies about hearing-impaired people, I asked if his mother could read lips or speak. Peter explained that due to his grandparents' poverty, she had to adapt without expensive interventions from an early age. While she had survived, he said, her inability to hear wasn't even the most serious issue. She had vocal cord problems that prevented speech, and she couldn't read lips either. He assured me they communicated perfectly through gestures, and promised she was a wonderful woman. I smiled and expressed my desire to meet her, suggesting that Peter could act as our interpreter. Relieved by my understanding, Peter then shared his main concern. He wanted to live with me but couldn't leave his mother alone, so he asked if they could both stay in my house for a while. Though not entirely thrilled with the idea, I agreed. Peter acknowledged that most young couples prefer living apart from their parents. He explained that his situation was different, adding that once their new house was ready, they would live with his mother and hire professionally trained caregivers. I felt sympathy for both Peter and his mother. I assured him that I truly didn't mind his mother living with us, believing we could make it work. Out of genuine curiosity, I asked about his father and whether he would visit us. Peter's expression darkened as he explained their complicated relationship. He told me how his father had deeply loved his mother when they married, considering her disability's minor issues. Things had gone well for a while until his father simply stopped loving her and didn't even try to hide it. His mother wasn't the type to stay with someone who didn't love her, so they parted ways. Now he maintained purely business relations with his father, while his mother had no contact at all. These revelations made me even more inclined to welcome Peter's mother. I quickly told him that this was the perfect time for his mother to move in with us. I assured him our spacious home had plenty of room for everyone, including his mother and any future children we might have. The next day, Peter arrived with his mother, and I was taken aback by how attractive, elegant, and surprisingly young she appeared. They looked more like siblings than mother and son. I wasn't surprised by their lack of physical resemblance. After all, I took after my father rather than my mother myself. Peter's mother sat at the table with an attractive smile, though clearly uncomfortable, unable to understand a word I was saying. As Peter acted as interpreter, I couldn't help but notice his mother's small, delicate hands moving as she spoke. I found myself fascinated by her gestures, yet frustrated that I couldn't understand them directly. I should learn her language, I thought to myself, recognizing how important it would be to communicate with my future mother-in-law when Peter wasn't around. Still, I tried to see the bright side of the situation. While many of my acquaintances complained about complicated relationships with their mothers-in-law, I was spared such problems. Peter's mother was a quiet, unobtrusive presence, barely noticeable in our home and rarely interfering with our lives as a young couple. The thought crossed my mind to invite her to live with us permanently. I was certain both Peter and his mother, especially Peter, would love this idea. Though Peter had suggested his mother would eventually move to her own space, he seemed reluctant about the idea. At first, living together worked surprisingly well. She moved through the house with an almost angelic lightness, offering gentle smiles and mysterious gestures. Peter would sometimes translate what she was saying, and other times just wave his hand, indicating it was something that only concerned them. But as the wedding drew closer, I began feeling increasingly uncomfortable with this quiet coexistence. The nonverbal communication between Peter and his mother intensified, and I felt completely excluded. "We're just talking about wedding things," Peter would often say. Meanwhile, his mother's smiles toward me were no longer kind but seemed almost opposite in nature. I began to suspect that Peter's mother understood more than she let on, and this troubled me deeply. The situation reached a point where I knew I had to learn sign language. I was determined to understand these silent exchanges that excluded me. Initially, I believed I could use this new skill to deepen my connection with my mother-in-law. However, I soon discovered there was a different, more crucial reason to acquire this ability. While I hadn't imagined my future relatives were deliberately hiding anything, I couldn't understand why Peter took so long to translate his conversations with his mother. If they had nothing to hide, why not share the content of their conversations openly? After all, I thought it was rude to speak in an unknown language in front of someone, excluding and confusing them. Not wanting to confront Peter directly, yet unwilling to suffer in silence, I decided to find a solution. After some research, I realized that while learning a foreign language might be challenging, it was nothing compared to learning sign language. Though qualified instructors were scarce, I was fortunate to connect with a kind elderly woman named Marcia, who offered sign language lessons. Living nearby with a flexible schedule due to retirement and low student demand, she seemed the perfect choice. The next day, I visited Marcia for my first lesson. Despite my initial concerns about the complexity of sign language, she reassured me with her experience teaching both children and adults at a school for the deaf. Encouraged by her confidence, I felt ready to begin immediately. Although the lessons were expensive, I considered them worthwhile for breaking down communication barriers within my family. She explained this would be an introductory lesson, and I found myself drawn to her teaching method. She complemented her explanations with precise, expressive hand gestures that showcased her years of practice. "You're an excellent student," the teacher praised me. "I believe you'll master this quickly." "And you're a wonderful teacher," I replied with a smile. "Learning from you is both fascinating and meaningful." Our shared moment of joy was interrupted by a curious 5-year-old boy who burst in to greet the new visitor. "Leo, are you up already?" Marcia called out. The little boy, fresh from his nap, asked if he could watch TV, but was told to wait until after lunch. Marcia then invited me to join them for lunch, but I politely declined, explaining I needed to leave. "Will you come back?" Leo asked, clearly intrigued by his grandmother's new student. "Yes, I have another lesson tomorrow," I answered, feeling an immediate connection with the child. That evening, as I observed my future husband and his mother, I felt a new understanding of their relationship. Though I still couldn't decode their conversations, I began to appreciate the depth and intimacy of their interactions. Peter noticed my change in behavior. After his mother retired for rest, he approached me privately and pointed out how I'd been intensely watching them all day. He criticized me, asking if I didn't realize how uncomfortable that might make someone in his mother's condition. Slightly irritated by the situation, I expressed my frustration at being excluded when they spoke as if I wasn't there. "How would you feel if I invited friends over tomorrow and we spoke German because you couldn't understand it?" I asked, trying to help him see my perspective. The discussion shifted to his mother's health condition. Peter was frustrated at the thought of having to translate detailed conversations about personal matters, like medical results. I argued that it wasn't insensitive to want information about my future mother-in-law's health. "Fine, I'll be more thoughtful from now on." "Sorry," Peter concluded, though his tone remained irritated. This situation gave me much to think about. I worried about these misunderstandings and tensions arising before we were even married. I loved Peter deeply and dreamed of building a family with him. This dream grew stronger after meeting little Leo. The next day, having no relatives or children of my own, I found special joy in buying a toy as a present for Leo. The conversation took a serious turn when Marcia shared her family's tragic story. Leo's mother, Marcia's daughter-in-law, had died during childbirth, leaving the child motherless, and her son Nathan without a partner. Nathan, a young widower, had tried to rebuild his life with his son. Years later, he'd left for long-term employment in the north and disappeared. Despite extensive searches, he was presumed dead, though I sensed Marcia hadn't lost hope. As she shared this story, unwanted tears welled up in her eyes. I was deeply moved and reached out to comfort her, searching for the right words of encouragement. But she cut me off, saying, "That's enough. Let's begin our lesson. You're not paying me to talk about my life." This revelation explained why she needed to work almost daily despite her age. I brought small gifts for Marcia and her grandson almost daily, despite her protests. Bringing these gifts brings me joy, and I feel I'm making progress with my learning. Don't you agree? I would say. Marcia acknowledged my talent and rapid progress, attributing it to both my determination and my desire to understand Peter and his mother's secret language. Over time, our sign language communication became quite fluent. Sometimes, I would ask her to express herself using only her hands, focusing intently on interpreting each gesture. "Your interest seems to lie more in speaking than listening," she accurately observed, emphasizing the importance of facial expressions and body language in communication. After a month of lessons, I had made remarkable progress in understanding sign language. However, I chose not to reveal this progress at home, maintaining a cautious approach to avoid misinterpreting conversations or worse, being discovered. My bond with Leo grew stronger, and even after achieving my initial goal, I didn't want to end the lessons with Marcia. My presence had become a source of joy for both grandmother and grandson, strengthening their relationship even further. Finally, determined to understand the nature of Peter and his mother's conversations, I paid close attention to their next dialogue. My recent caution had lowered their guard, and they started speaking naturally in front of me. The first conversation I fully understood left me shocked, and I struggled to maintain my composure. "I'm tired of pretending I don't understand," I thought to myself. "Peter, do you really think it's easy for me to accept you enjoying yourself with your fiancé in the room?" His mother signed with a resigned gesture. "When's the wedding, and how much do you think we'll get from this?" Peter interrupted, "If we plan it right, there should be enough money to live comfortably for a long time. We might even go without working for a year." Too shocked to hear more, I rushed from the room, having no intention of confronting these con artists alone. After all, who knew what they might do if they discovered their secret was exposed? But how had I fallen for this deception? Why hadn't I investigated more thoroughly about my fiancé, his business, his mother, and other important matters? Had my sympathy for his mother's condition clouded my judgment so completely? They were certainly masterful con artists. But what should I do now? It was clear to me that I needed to go to the police and report everything. How embarrassing, I thought to myself, but better to face a little shame now than lose everything after marriage. The next day, I went to the police station and explained everything about the con artists who had infiltrated my home. The detective received this news like a precious gift. "We've been tracking them for a long time. They're cunning and have operated with the same pattern in various cities. One of them pretends to be deaf and mute to evoke people's sympathy and empathy. They communicate in a way nobody can decode, but in reality, they're neither deaf nor mute. In interrogation and court, they'll sing like nightingales." "Did they claim to be mother and son?" the detective asked. "Yes, aren't they?" I inquired curiously. "Unfortunately, they're not. They are part of a criminal organization. She's only 12 years older than him, they're lovers," the detective explained. "I apologize for being so direct, but you did an excellent job discovering them. You even went to the trouble of learning their language. Let's hope they don't know that you know." "No, I haven't said anything," I replied, my voice trembling with the weight of these revelations. Though suffering, hurt, and mourning the happiness that would never be mine, I had felt such deep love and trust for Peter. This betrayal left me questioning how I could ever trust anyone again. We'll dispatch a team immediately to arrest these con artists. They'll face the consequences of their actions, the detective assured me firmly, trying to calm my nerves. Don't worry. Everything will work out in your favor. We've seen cases far more unfortunate than yours. I waited patiently until my home was freed from these fake mother and a son. When I finally returned home, the first thing I did was cry consoling tears in my room. Then I called a cleaning service to remove every trace of the criminal's presence. Once the house was clean, I felt immense relief at being liberated from these evil people, and decided to show my gratitude to those who had helped me. Filled with thankfulness and wanting to avoid future dangers, I prepared a basket of sweets, fruits, and toys to visit the elderly Marcia who had helped me so much. I was ready to tell her the whole truth about why I needed those lessons. Both Marcia and Leo welcomed me warmly. After sending Leo off to play, we engaged in animated conversation using the language I had recently learned. Marcia praised me for escaping a dangerous situation. But at that moment, I noticed her medical books and exhausted appearance. These were clear signs of health problems. Worried, I expressed my concern. You haven't mentioned it before, but you seem to be facing health issues. Is there any way I can help? She let out a deep sigh, full of sadness and regret. These past few years have been extremely difficult. I lost my beloved son, he disappeared, leaving my grandson an orphan. Now, where can we find the strength to go on? Sometimes I go to sleep not knowing if I'll wake up the next day. I worry less about myself and more about little Leo. We're alone in this world. If something happens to me, who will take care of him? Perhaps you need some medication. If you'll allow me, I can try to find and obtain it for you, I offered. Why should you worry about me? She asked, reflecting the intimacy we'd built over the past few months. Because I too am alone, with no one to care for me, I replied. I dreamed of having my own family, with a husband and children. But things didn't work out as expected. So please, don't hide your needs. You still have so much life to live. One day, while at work, I received a tearful phone call from Leo, telling me Marcia was seriously ill. Without wasting a moment, I rushed to their house. Marcia was still conscious, but too weak to call an ambulance herself. I took the initiative to call one. While waiting for the paramedics to arrive, she whispered to me, "Please, take care of Leo." I promised her I wouldn't abandon him. She was taken to the hospital, and I became the comforting presence for the frightened boy. Leo was full of questions, terrified about his grandmother's future and the possibility of being sent to an orphanage. Don't worry, Leo. Everything will be all right. I'll take care of you, I assured him. But deep inside, I felt profound fear and concern. My fears became reality when, a few days later, I received the call announcing Marcia's death. I then faced the challenge of becoming Leo's legal guardian. It was a complicated task since I wasn't a direct relative. However, thanks to my financial resources and connections, I was able to legally place Leo under my protection. With the responsibility of caring for Leo and the need to continue working, I began searching for a babysitter. Meanwhile, my business began to decline without my constant supervision. Revenue decreased, and competitors found opportunities to take over my company. Soon, I began to suspect internal betrayal. Particularly from my vice president, Anthony, a man who had worked with my father and whom I had completely trusted. When I tried to confront him directly, his behavior only strengthened my suspicions. No excuses needed, Anthony. There's a board meeting in a few days. We'll discuss the current situation there. You must understand that things cannot continue as they are, I stated firmly. But that meeting never took place. I was involved in a car accident caused by deliberately sabotaged brakes. I survived but suffered severe spinal injuries that left me immobilized. The doctors offered hope through proper treatment and rehabilitation, but I fell into a deep depression. I doubted my ability to recover. The attending physician expressed concerns to colleagues about my crucial need for a desire to recover, but I remained wrapped in doubt. I felt overwhelmed by recent personal events. After the accident and losing Marcia, my only comfort and confidant, I found myself alone again. This time, my solitude was compounded by workplace problems, general distrust, and an inability to trust anyone. But what I hadn't anticipated was facing an even deeper betrayal. The accident, I discovered, had been orchestrated by Anthony, someone I had trusted for years. The investigation revealed he had tampered with security footage to cover his tracks. When exposed, Anthony confessed his intention to take over the company and eliminate me, the daughter of his former business partner at whose funeral he had feigned grief. Though he would face appropriate punishment, it brought me little comfort. I was suffering both physically and mentally, vulnerable and terrified of losing custody of Leo and him being sent to an orphanage. Sinking into despair and contemplating giving up everything, I assessed my financial situation. I determined I could live modestly with my remaining savings, covering nurses' and housekeepers' salaries along with necessary medical expenses. Despite dedicating my life to growing the business, everything I had fought for seemed to end abruptly. I felt completely abandoned when I needed support the most. Then something completely unexpected happened. Marcia's missing son appeared at my house. After experiencing so many disappointments, I greeted him with a mixture of indifference and skepticism. This dignified, imposing man seemed surprised by my distrust. He stated directly, "Yes, Marcia was my mother, and Leo is my son. I know she's passed away. But where is Leo? I heard you took him in." His appearance claiming family ties to Leo added another layer of complexity to my already complicated situation. Despite the evidence he claimed to have, I hesitated to believe his story. I questioned his true intentions. Limited by my accident-induced mobility issues, I called Natalie, Leo's babysitter, firmly from my wheelchair. "Natalie, please bring Leo here. There's nothing to worry about." I watched the man confidently place a series of documents on the table, claiming everything was in order. But I paid no attention to them. "I don't need your papers. I know how such documents can be fabricated. What do you want? Are you planning to take Leo away, or are you trying to get money from me?" I demanded firmly. At that moment, Natalie appeared with Leo. He didn't recognize the man who claimed to be his father, having not seen him since he was 3 years old, and stared at the stranger in surprise. "Don't you remember him, Leo?" I asked gently, trying to facilitate the reunion. The man turned pale but approached with hopeful anticipation. Meanwhile, Leo moved closer to me for reassurance, holding my hand tightly. "Is he here to take me away?" Leo asked, his voice tinged with fear. "This man says he's your father. Do you remember? The times I pushed you on the swing, our trip to the bird exhibition, how scared you were of that big colorful parrot." The man tried to spark Leo's memories. "Yes," it screamed very loudly, Leo answered, still clutching my hand tighter. "That's right," the man confirmed, trying to strengthen their connection. "Do you remember what the parrot said?" he probed gently. "Hello," Leo whispered, his anxiety evident in his fear of being separated from me. "Do I have to go with him? Or can I stay here? I want to stay with Holly Beth. I love her," the boy said, his voice trembling. "Now, there's nothing to be afraid of. Neither you nor Holly Beth need to fear anything. I'm not here to take anyone away. I just wanted to make sure you were doing well." I plan to visit until Leo gets used to me. Maybe then we can become friends, the man said, trying to ease the tension and fear, offering a bridge to future reconciliation and coexistence. As you can see, we're doing fine, I said, patting the arm of my wheelchair. To be honest, I was worried you'd try to take Leo away. He's my last connection to this world. Leo, would you mind playing with Natalie for a while? I need to talk with your father. Once the child had left, I turned back to the man. I understand you're not planning to take him away immediately. But what do you want? Is it money? Why would you think I have no interest in your child? I only said I wasn't taking him away right now. What I'm asking for is permission to be part of his life. And I don't understand what role money plays in this conversation. After years of disappointment and financial fraud, it's hard for me to trust anyone, I continued. Let's say I believe you're Marcia's son and Leo's father. And let's say you're not after money, just wanting to build a connection with your son. But you were absent for almost 3 years. That's a long time. And while you might have had a good reason, you abandoned your sick mother and son, leaving no trace and providing no financial support. That's why I not only find it hard to believe you but also difficult to understand, I continued. I admit it's complicated, the man said. He seemed prepared to explain his long absence with an unbelievable story. Think what you want about my absence. But the truth is, the reason for my silence is beyond belief. I responded firmly, I don't care if you got lost or were abducted by aliens. What's best for Leo is to be with his biological father. Someone healthy and capable. Unlike my current condition. I accept reality and know my limitations in caring for him. I'll continue living on my remaining savings and eventually my pension. So come, let Leo get used to you. And when time passes, you can take him. I'm living in my mother's apartment, as I'm her direct heir. It would be a familiar place for Leo, the man added. Even if it's more comfortable here, that would be the right thing to do. The doctors gave you hope for recovery, didn't they? If there's a possibility, why not try? Thank you for your kind words. I truly appreciate them. But the truth is, I have no strength left to fight. If you knew everything I've had to face this past year. I said. Listen to my experience. Perhaps it might change your disappointment in me. And it might give you something to think about. If you have time, please listen, Nathan said. His expression reflected both resignation and the necessity of sharing his story. Just a moment. I'll have my assistant bring us something. Would you like some tea? Or perhaps something to eat? Thank you. Tea and some light refreshments would be fine. I look forward to telling you my story. And I assure you, no alien abduction tales, he replied with a gentle smile, trying to lighten the mood. Natalie carefully prepared the table, bringing tea and some light snacks. Then we were left alone for Nathan to begin his story. My mother must have told you I'm Nathan. 3 years ago, I took what was supposed to be a safe, well-paying job shift in the north. Everything was going fine until one day I decided to capture the wild beauty with my camera. I left the trail, thinking I could easily return to camp. But I made a mistake. His voice was heavy with regret for that impulsive decision. Suddenly, I found myself caught in a snowstorm unlike anything I'd ever seen. Visibility was zero, nothing but snow in every direction. I tried to return to camp, but each step took me further away. I should have stayed put, but fear of the cold kept me moving. Then, out of nowhere, a bear appeared. We faced each other in the storm. Fortunately, the bear was as startled as I was and just pushed past me before leaving. That was all it took. I passed out. Hours later, maybe longer, I don't know, a hunter tracking the bear found me frozen and unconscious. He took me to his cabin, not knowing where I'd come from. He couldn't leave me to die in the snow. This hunter wasn't just a hermit, he had first aid knowledge. But he couldn't contact anyone. His only means of communication was broken, and in those conditions, help couldn't have reached us anyway. Still, he cared for me until I regained consciousness, though I couldn't remember who I was or where I'd come from. As time passed and I recovered, summer came, and my memories slowly returned. Finally, I remembered who I was and where I belonged. Nathan's story was told with such sincerity and detail that it not only captured my attention but allowed me to see him in a different light. It helped me understand the depth of his experience and the reason for his absence. When I came to, I told the hunter about my workplace. But he informed me the camp no longer existed, everyone had gone. This news was devastating. The forest ranger suggested waiting for a rescue team, but the thought of how long that might take made me anxious. As long as necessary, was his terse reply. The hunter was a man of few words, not the type to open up. I couldn't just sit and wait. When spring came and the snow melted, I decided to take action myself. Just show me the way, I said. I need to find my people, at least some trace of civilization. I need to get home. My mother and son are waiting. His response was discouraging. Nathan continued. Go wherever you want. This is the forest. There are no marked paths. You might encounter wildlife, and this time I won't be around to save you. Finding lost madmen isn't my job. Finally, after winter passed and the next summer came, he agreed to guide me back to civilization. As you can imagine, it took a long time to get home without money or identification. Sadly, I was too late for my mother. Because of me, you have been bearing this burden. I'm grateful Leo is starting to remember things. I have no intention of separating him from you, Holly Beth. I just want to visit him as often as possible, if you'll allow it. It's important for a father and son to get to know each other and become comfortable with one another. Right now, I'm just a stranger to him. But if I had given up and chosen to die alone in that northern forest, that would have been a mistake. My survival instinct told me that if I didn't have the will to recover, I might as well die there. After all, the hunter had no obligation to care for me. As a city person, I initially hesitated to join the fight for survival, but when I realized no one would pity me or take care of me, I understood I had to take action myself. Even the hunter admitted he didn't think I would get up and recover. I'm not trying to persuade you. But living miserably won't help you. It won't help Leo either. I can see how much Leo loves you. That's why I'm not rushing to take him away. But do you want Leo to take care of you when he grows up? Especially when you no longer have resources to hire help? I could go to a facility for the disabled, I suggested. That seems like an easy escape route. Especially for someone young and beautiful. I can't even imagine being in that situation, I said, struggling to hold back tears. I want to live. But please understand my fears. Spinal surgery is terrifying. I could become completely disabled. I might not even be able to sit in a wheelchair anymore. I would become a burden. Do you think that's good? I don't think so, I said. But you have resources. Perhaps we can find good doctors who can help you, Nathan replied. I wanted to argue fiercely as I had before, but I was exhausted. I was terrified of risking what little I had left. I'm sorry. This is all so difficult for me. I'm alone. I've lost trust in everyone. I simply don't have the strength. How can I know which doctors to trust? How can I face rehabilitation? Stop crying, stop being afraid, Nathan said. I understand you as much as I can. I know it's harder for you, but you need to live. And I want you to live fully. Tomorrow, I'll research everything about your injury, the surgery, and the risks. Then I'll tell you everything. Then you can make a decision. Meanwhile, may I spend some time with Leo before I go? I was lost in my thoughts. Nathan's words made me think deeply. Was I making a mistake by refusing even the possibility of recovery? The surgery would be complicated, but wasn't I making my life and others' lives more complicated by refusing it? I realized I had gradually changed from a decisive woman into someone who just complained and made demands. I had become a burden to everyone around me. The nurses caring for me seemed to tolerate my attitude more out of duty than compassion. But how long could this situation continue? I closed my eyes, embarrassed as I remembered my recent behavior. Just then, Nathan approached to say goodbye. I gently asked if he could get information about the possibility of surgery. Because things couldn't continue like this. Without a word, Nathan gave me a thumbs up. From that day on, my attitude changed dramatically. Though my physical condition remained the same, I stopped demanding constant attention and began facing some challenges on my own. I met with the doctor Nathan had found and approached the future with renewed confidence. While I didn't regain my independence immediately, the surgery was successful. At first, the problem seemed to get worse. But Nathan and Leo wouldn't let me fall into despair. They visited me in the hospital every day, supporting me and celebrating even the smallest progress. Finally, the day came when I stood up for the first time since the accident, with Nathan's help. Though this was just the beginning of my recovery, I soon became confident that I would walk on my own and fully regain my previous life. While concerns about the business still troubled me, my focus had shifted. I realized I couldn't abandon my father's legacy. During my hospitalization, I began actively engaging with the team running the company, first by phone, then by inviting them to visit to the hospital after discharge. I met them in formal attire, making it clear that Holly Beth was back. We've lost much due to the former vice president's conspiracy and my illness, I acknowledged. But I'm confident that working together, we can not only recover what we've lost, but grow even stronger. When I first appeared at the general meeting, walking with a cane, the employees welcomed me with cheers. As I regained my business skills, my personal relationship with Nathan deepened. I recognized his crucial role in my recovery and confessed, "You literally saved my life. Without your support, I'd still be bound to that wheelchair, demanding everyone's attention." One day, Nathan revealed his feelings to me. "I fell in love with you at first sight, Holly Beth. Even in your most difficult and sad moments, I always knew that someday you would stand up and walk to me and accept becoming my wife in a white dress." Nathan's confession was unexpected but welcome. I knew I had finally found someone I could completely trust and love, perhaps for the first time in my life. "Of course I accept," I replied. "But let's wait until I can walk without the cane." That moment came sooner than expected. Soon, we were dancing our first dance as bride and groom in a solemn ceremony, both of us glowing with happiness. How did you like this story? Please let us know in the comments if you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We invite you to watch more surprising stories that are sure to amaze you.